So welcome everybody to this quarter's Ask the Experts webinar titled How Software is Powering the Hardware Renaissance, featuring Mike Hogg, Director System Solutions and Partner at Zulka Engineering, and Chris Holland, VP of Cloud Services at Gemalto. My name is Jam Khan. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for Gemalto's Software Modernization Business Unit. And we're seeing a shift across multiple industries from hardware-centric to software-centric solutions and correspondingly customer-focused business models. Recurring revenue streams such as subscription and consumption-based pricing put more emphasis on user experience and customer loyalty. While software allows us to deliver these personalized experiences, the ability to actually deliver the software through all kinds of hardware platforms is powering a new type of hardware renaissance. Intelligent devices range from hardware security modules that store cryptographic keys to smart tennis rackets. This live webinar will focus on key paradigms that are both enabling and driving the interplay between software business models and hardware delivery platforms. Mike will explore the importance of user centricity, effective innovation, and a holistic systems view in digital engagement. Chris will further validate the customer-centric approach through a successful case study of integrating a software-centric strategy into a hardware platform. Before we start, I want to draw your attention to the questions window on the webinar control panel. It's down at the bottom right-hand side. You're all on mute, but feel free to submit your questions anytime during the session through the webinar. I'll be moderating them and submitting them to the speakers towards the end of the webinar. And we'll make sure that all of your questions get addressed. So we're ready to begin. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you, Mike.
Hi, thanks very much for the introduction. I'm Mike Hogg from Zulka Engineering. I very appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you today. Thanks to Gemalto for inviting me. Many industries are seeing a move from hardware-centric solutions to digital solutions with software at their core. So I would like to share with you 4 key paradigms that I believe are both enabling and driving this transition. The first I wanted to cover is user centricity, which is putting the users of a particular product or service at the very center of how it's designed, how it's delivered, and its overall life cycle. This is Sean Connery in the film The Hunt for Red October. His submarine was brimming with advanced features for the era, but that required a very large crew to operate, pretty much one mariner per machine, many mariners manning multiple machines. Contrast that, if you will, with Lawrence Fishburne as the sole officer aboard the spacecraft. This is the film Passengers. Essentially, there's not a great deal more functionality for monitoring the craft and its environment here, but the interface for Lawrence is optimized, so it can all be controlled by him completely alone if need be. Closer to home, consider the typewriter and its current equivalent, the keyboard. The ease of use of these, the friction between the human and the computer, has to be a balance between what's technically feasible and what users will tolerate. And often that's being driven by what's mechanically possible. Contrast that to the direction that user interfaces are taking now. This is challenging the concept that we need to type individual characters into a keyboard to communicate with a machine. We're another step further down the path of a more natural, lower friction human-computer interface. And the transition to these software-defined interfaces gives us much more flexibility on optimizing this interface to how a particular user wants to interact with a particular system. This is an advert from BMW, and really this transition is self-reinforcing, because the more users experience interfaces better aligned to what they actually want to do, the more that they demand. They expect interaction, integration, customization. For BMW, that means online music, that means traffic-based navigation, that means calendar integration, and a wealth of other features and services. By building software platforms into their devices, manufacturers can continue to provide and sell new features to products long after they've left the factory, which is driven by user need. they can continue to innovate, they can continue to keep the customer engaged, and most importantly, they can generate ongoing revenue streams based on new features rolled out onto the software, whereas previously they would have had a one-time revenue on the sale of the device, and that would have been very much the core part of the revenue of that transaction. So the overall shift here is from an engineering-centric paradigm where the user interface was largely dictated by the hardware to a user-centric world where software and digital interfaces are driven by what works best for the user, customized for each individual in a way that a keyboard could never be. The tech companies that are leading this transition are building themselves powerful positions as the providers of platforms with strong user loyalty. It's a really good question is to ask yourself, is your phone a Samsung phone or is it an Android phone? The tech platforms really are building a very strong environment and set themselves well for the future. The second paradigm that I wanted to talk about is the industrial disruption that the rise of software over hardware has created. It's often said that software disrupts every industry, that tech and digital companies are taking over the world. And that's certainly true if you measure companies by market capitalization. If you look at the changes that have happened in the top companies over the last decade or so. In many domains have undergone dramatic changes, the music industry, the newspaper industry, and the likes of Apple, Facebook, Google, Amazon, and others are now major player in these spaces and are reaching out into many other domains. Clayton Christensen, a Harvard professor, wrote a very interesting 1997 book called The Innovator's Dilemma. In that book, he describes how market leaders can lose their leadership to new, unexpected competitors through little fault of their own. It can be inherently difficult for large market leaders to innovate in the same way that small newcomers can. A major factor in this is what Professor Christensen called the S-curve of innovation. New innovations are generally slow to realize their full value, the left-hand side flat part of the S-curve. They require multiple iterations to discover the most valuable formula. They often have to focus on specific niches because the majority of users are happy with what they get from the market leaders, and there's a high risk of failure. A lot of new ideas don't make it beyond the initial plateau on the left. If the entrant does reach the steep middle section of the S-curve, then they really start to disrupt the market. And that's where the incumbent can find themselves in trouble because they're a long way behind. And what the startup, the disruptive entrant has learned during that long gestation period, the incumbent needs to catch up. So does this mean that market leaders can't innovate themselves? Well, absolutely they can and they do. But because of where they are, because of their existing customers and their existing offerings, their customers demand most of their attention. So when they try and innovate, it's very tempting to focus on the small incremental innovation to what they're already doing, tweaking the current offering, striving for small incremental changes, slightly bigger, better chickens. Their vision is limited by their position and very limited by their clients and what their clients are asking for. So is all lost to big incumbents? Well, no, not at all. And Professor Christensen advocated, and our experience is well aligned to this, that a really good way for companies to develop new disruptive innovations is to set up autonomous startups. They're loosely bound to the parent. They can share the resources of the parent, so they've got an advantage over other startups who are very resource constrained. But these autonomous units aren't limited to the current customers. They're not restricted to the current vision. And they're far enough away such that the failures that they will encounter, and they will encounter multiple failures, don't cause damage to the parent. Something that Zulka does is provide client tech teams to work with our customers in this way. This particular picture is a screen from the AMC TV series Halt and Catch Fire, which you haven't seen it, it's on Amazon Prime Video. I'd strongly recommend. It's great fun. The third paradigm that I wanted to talk about was the increasing importance of taking a holistic system-wide view. Many companies are run in a highly siloed way, with each department in the organization working on their specific piece, be that hardware, software, marketing, production, customer service, after sales care, with minimal consideration of the other. But software is getting deeper ingrained in our offerings, in our products, and in the complete life cycle. So within customer interactions and interfaces along the whole chain. It's enabling a longer and deeper relationship with our clients. Products that we would ship and never interact with again are now linked to the web and mobile services. These can generate recurrent revenue streams where we're adding new features for customers, but they can also link into our support network so that we can see problems before the customer can see them. They can link in to complaints and to issues resolution, such that when people report and need help, we can help them through the process by understanding how they're using the system and pointing them in the right direction as to how it could be used. So integration between all, and also in the production. So we're increasingly seeing that people are putting digital technology into products like white goods and the like, such that it's easy to track them through the production life cycle, through the logistics network, and when they get to the end users. That technology can then be useful with the users, but it really can bring value from the factory to the user's premises, that first initial installation journey as well. So with all these things, integration is key. The various departments and disciplines within a company are all part of a large chain, and a chain is only as strong as its weakest point. Companies need to organize to make this collaboration part of the company structure. This needs multidisciplinary product teams, and it's critical also that the user is represented. The user view is involved from the start. Not just somebody representing the customer, but by somebody actually going out and testing ideas and propositions with real users, such that their input, their view, and whether people are actually going to engage and pay for a service is understood before too much investment is made. The other point I wanted to make here is that when you start a project, it's very difficult to know exactly what's going to be involved and what's going to be needed from each discipline. It's best to refrain from putting the full delivery team together before the vision is understood, before an outline framework has been designed and that framework has been put in place to test the feasibility of it. Really, if you involve a particular discipline too early, that might skew the outcome. Apologies for the cheesy A-team reference here, but you really don't put your A-team in place until you know exactly what skills are going to be needed. The last paradigm that I wanted to talk about is one of digital engagement. There's lots of talk in the literature and in the news about the different generations and their different motivations, characteristics, politics, and also their relative embrace of technology. However, really your generation is not a very good indicator of your level of digital engagement. And by means of example, apologies for the personal reference here, but these are my parents who are now retired. My mother, she was a teacher. My dad, he was an electrical engineer. Who of them is more digitally engaged? It's my mum. She wouldn't survive without her iPhone. She lives on Facebook, and of course she's got a Fitbit. By contrast, my dad's really not that interested. He doesn't feel the need to pay for mobile data for his phone, which isn't particularly sophisticated. He's very happy on his old PC. He's very happy with his old applications. He will do digital, he will do email on web when it suits him, but he doesn't feel that that's really where he's going to start. There's some really good research. These classifications come from a gentleman called Ray Wang, who's the chairman of Constellation Research. And it's really the different levels of digital engagements, from natives who know of no other, and immigrants like my mum who've learned to love digital technologies, through to holdouts who really haven't embraced digital, will only use it when they're forced to, and the disengaged who are really worried about their digital exhaust and they're consciously offline. The voyeurs, just in case you're interested, those are the people who can see the benefit in digital, but they don't think that it's really for them. They want to take a wait and see approach and look from outside. So when we're planning our product offering, we need to consider which of these levels of digital engagement are important for us. For instance, if it's a product for the home and we're looking for mass appeal, then maybe it needs a connected app for the natives, but maybe it also needs to be able to run without any sort of connected app or ongoing attention for the digital holdouts. And most importantly, whatever decision you make, you need to go and test that with your target users a long way before you actually go and try and formulate the final product. And that has to be your real end target users. It's dangerous to make assumptions. You need to go across a good cross section and with the various levels of digital engagement. That's everything I wanted to share. Apologies again for the delay at the beginning there. Yeah, I've been Mike Hogg. I run a systems development team in Zulka Engineering. We build software and hardware solutions for our clients. Those clients who find that they need a bespoke solution built to address their particular opportunity or need. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Mike. There have been a few questions coming in, but we'll address all of them together, since I think we'll allow both of you guys to comment on the questions given the topic. So with that said, I will pass it over to Chris Holland. The floor is yours, Chris.
Thank you, Jam, and thank you again for the opportunity to present and talk. Just before I start, great presentation, Mike. I very much enjoyed that, and I think what I'm going to present certainly talks on the industrial part of your presentation that you talked about. My name's Chris Holland. I've been with Gemalto through the last 10 to 15 years. I've actually been in the encryption and security space for a little bit longer than that. I've been both on the engineering and on the product management sides of the business, and apart from a brief stint in the software monetization business along with Jam some years ago, I have been focused on the encryption side of the world. A couple of things, since I'm going to be talking about how the hardware renaissance and how software is affecting the encryption space and the encryption business. It's worth just mentioning a couple of things. First of all, that there is usually in the encryption space always a reliance on hardware, and that's for protecting the keys. Don't need to go into it too much, but basically at the root of almost all secure systems has to be a piece of hardware to keep the keys in place. But most of the use cases do rely on software, and in fact, what I'll show is that the number of use cases have really exploded because of the way people use systems in enterprises today, and the number of ways that we have delivered and changed what we deliver to be more software-centric to take care of that. This webinar series is about hardware renaissance, and I think what I wanted to talk about as well is how the change that we see in our encryption business, moving from hardware to software, and I think it's a change that some other companies have seen in the enterprise solution space, is a fear from competitors and startups coming into the space, disrupting the industry, and an internal fear from our perspective of cannibalizing our own business. If we go ahead and try and compete with the startups in the space and create new and innovative solutions, are we at risk of cannibalizing our own business? And how does the role of hardware change in what we do, and how do the business models and things that we do affect all of that? I hope to show that we were a bit surprised with how things actually are turning out, and we're not cannibalizing our business, and that our embracing of the change to more software-oriented solutions have actually reinforced the need for hardware, have actually increased our business far from cannibalizing it, and has put us on a good track for innovating and driving more use cases and business models because of these more software-oriented advances that we've been making.
Chris, sorry, nobody can hear you. Can you please unmute yourself?
Sorry, folks. Give us a
Okay,
moment while we. You're back.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I didn't mute myself, and when you told me I was muted, I tried to click the unmute. It wouldn't unmute. Not sure what happened there. It probably happened at a point at which I changed slides. Maybe that triggered it. So I'll just come back to the beginning of this slide here. What I was talking about is how in the business that I'm in, the industry has expected a number of changes, and there's lots of changes that industries have expected, but these are the three main ones that have affected the encryption space. The first is that customers are expected to buy things instantly, that they expect to receive delivery of those things instantly, and that they expect that the things that they have received delivery of to be able to scale up and down virtually instantly. And for a company that has been delivering hardware solutions, those changes are profound. They touch not only the products that we build, they change how we build them, they change the services that we offer, and have forced us to become not only a product company, but also a services-oriented company. And they change all of the business processes at the back end in order for us to be able to do those things. So these are very significant challenges for an industry that has traditionally been solely focused on providing hardware solutions. I'm going to change slide again and hope I don't mute myself. Okay, the light's still green. Maybe you can still hear me. So let's talk about, from my perspective, how key management and encryption solutions have evolved over the last period of 20 years or so, actually. So for the last, starting about 20 years ago, all encryption solutions have really been tied around the shipment of an appliance. When I joined this industry, I joined in a group that was building and shipping a security-based hardware appliance. And about 6 to 7 years ago, the demand really increased to have that kind of functionality as a virtual machine. 2 to 3 years ago, or 3 to 4 years ago, really, the shift of enterprises moving more workloads to as a service then called for a follow-on in the encryption space to support more as a service use cases. So two things really drove that. One is the more of an acceptance and trust in the cloud and its ability to deliver workloads securely. And secondly, a demand from the enterprises to be able to purchase and consume things on demand rather than in a more sort of traditional purchase and own type model. And we see in the last year or two here a demand for the same kinds of functions, but in a microservices-oriented fashion. People being able to want to deploy components of what we do and scale them up and down based on different functions within it on platforms that they operate internally, such as things like OpenShift and so on. So you can see that, you know, for 20 years we had appliances, 4 to 6 years ago virtual machines, 2 to 3 years ago services, and in the last year or so containerization. Each one of those representing quite significant shifts in how we build, deploy, ship, and offer our products. And based on that sort of exponential shift in time, I'm expecting another change any day now. One of the great things about what we do is that encryption and security is pretty hard, and we're lucky in the sense that as an established player in this space, and as the need for these kinds of solutions is driven very much by trust. People don't buy security products from startups that just showed up overnight. There does have to be some trust, there does have to be some experience there, and that really helped us inform what we did. And interestingly and fortunately, as it turned out, the customer space that we had didn't instantly demand to move from one to the other. There was always demand for all of these different platforms, and so we use these enhancements to innovate. We use these innovations, I should say, to enhance our existing products. And that was really useful because we were able to bring the new technologies, the new advances, the new changes in what we were doing back to all of our other platforms. So the containerization approach is now fed back into our appliances, and we can take advantage of all the new things that we do to bring it across all the different platforms. That's the engineering story, and that's where I spend a lot of time and focus. But of course, that's only part of the story for the business. The delivery and revenue models are also changing with those things. So in the appliance world, it's very easy. Charge per box. Customer buys multiple boxes. Then what they pay is scaled linearly with what they've consumed. From a business point of view, we manage a supply chain, we buy parts, we stick them together, we put them in a box and we ship them, and when something goes wrong, they send us one back and we deduct, X amount of dollars from what was paid. Very easy to manage, very simple, very traditional. Move to the virtual machine world, and now it gets a bit more complicated. Customers buy instances from Amazon and they pay an upcharge in price to us for the software that they run on those instances, and we don't have to worry about collecting it. We just get a nice check from Amazon or Azure or whoever at the end of every quarter, every period, based on what people have consumed in that space. And we move to a cloud service, and as most of you are probably familiar, whether you offer your own cloud services or most likely you're all individual consumers of cloud services in one way or another, that the revenue is now based on some form of metric. The number of clicks you make, the number of hours you spend logged in, the number of databases you operate, whatever it is, some metric is used to define your consumption, and then you typically have to collect your own revenue, and so that affects a lot of business process there to make all of that work, and quite a lot of shift there. And from a cost side, typically you're also relying on other people's services to glue together to make your overall service. In the containerized microservices world, what we're seeing now is back away from a services-oriented sales model, more to an on-premise licensing type situation, but now the scaling factors are both horizontal and vertical. There are demands to increase the performance of maybe one component of the overall offering, and also the number of applications that connect to it. So we're now having to deal with and address different ways to scale the offering from not only from the product but also from the business model perspective. So the biggest surprise for us from all of those things, and as I mentioned before, why we were lucky that all the innovation changes and all the business model changes were demanded across all of our platforms, not just in a stepwise forward-looking way, but also in a retrospective way, was that these solutions didn't cannibalize each other, and in fact led to a use case explosion in our customer space. And what we found was that it was not a very simple environment out there, and that customers had very, very complicated and different use cases, requiring them to consume not just one form factor from us, but all of them in different ways. And so, as I mentioned before, encryption and security typically always is always based on some form of hardware right at the root of the overall system, and that would be used to protect the core secrets and some of the core applications. But these same companies might be, for example, doing data mining, and maybe they do data mining once a year based on some events. Maybe they do them just after the Christmas sales period. And in that case, rather than buying all these machines to do that, they simply rent those machines from Amazon. And in that case, it makes sense for them to also deploy virtual machines next to those workloads in those instances that they're using to do that. In other cases, customers want to use our cloud services for disaster recovery situations, whereby they may have a location that perhaps is at risk of going offline, or their business being threatened from that, and so in those cases they want to be able to switch the systems over to a service hosted by us to take over. That might be a retail type operation where you don't want to have to shut down your terminals in your stores to be able to collect revenue if a data center goes down. And so the fact that we had driven those innovations back in to our business, not only on the product side, but also on the business delivery and operations side, meant that we could offer our customers combinations of these things, that they would work together, and that the different models that we offered could be applied to different ways that the products were delivered. This point here, really, the slide here talks a little bit more about some of the non-product but more operational challenges. I suspect many of those of you who might have been moving from traditional solutions to more as-a-service solutions might recognize some of these things, which would relate to the things that you typically are mature in doing, which might be building hardware and developing software on it, and then the gap between what you have from a maturity perspective and what the customer expects is the work to be done. And I think the point here I really wanted to make was that it is an engineering problem to address all of these changes, but it's not just an engineering problem. It's an operational problem, and it's a business process problem as well. My next slide is a bit of a shameless plug here. Not only because I was in the SM space, but also because this is an SM webinar, but it's also true that for us, the ability to address a lot of these operational changes was to make use of entitlements as a point of truth for our customers, particularly when it comes to that instant demand that people have, the ability to instantly acquire and deploy and test and expect from us these products and services, meant that we had to have a way to instantly inform all the different parts of our business of that customer's entitlement to those services. And so as part of that overall transformation, not only in the products but also in the business processes, we made a lot of use of the entitlements management systems that enabled us to share among the different parts of the organization information about customers and their rights. So just to summarize here, in terms of moving from hardware-centric to software-centric and how that has enhanced our overall business, led to growth, not cannibalization, and also more interest in the hardware that we have and how it sits at the core and how it operates with all these other pieces, is that it was a 20% engineering problem and an 80% business problem to deliver on those things. That customer expectations have really raced ahead, and that pace has accelerated in the last few years, and it's not over. So while we currently have a lot of focus on delivering solutions as microservices in container-based environments, I can't wait to see what happens next week in terms of the new demands that we have to face. I'm really glad that our customers didn't make stepwise shifts and continue to demand all of these flavors of offerings that we had, because that forced us to backport the innovations into the different things we do, and that puts us in a strong position with our customers to be able to offer all of these models across all of these different delivery models in a way that is cross-functional for us. And so that cannibalization fear that I think a lot of companies might have in terms of moving from physical to virtual offerings was in fact replaced by such an increase in use cases that were presented to us, and has driven us not to actually see cannibalization, but actually to see quite a lot of growth in this space. So that's the summary from my perspective. I hope you found that interesting, and Jam, back to you.
Thanks so much, Chris. I don't think the two of you guys really coordinated sessions, but I love how the two of these kind of connected and flowed well together. So we do have a few questions, and people haven't specified who they're for, so I'll open them up to whomever, or if both of you guys want to take a stab at answering them. First question is, from your experiences, what challenges particularly do traditional hardware vendors face when they are going through this sort of transition? Would you consider it organizational changes? Is it not getting executive level sort of buy-in, or not being able to kind of put your arms around a successful pilot? In general, as hardware vendors are transitioning, what are some of the challenges that they face?
Jam, I can talk to that one first if you like.
Great.
And I think at the risk of the quick answer is yes, all of the above. And if I can give the example of one customer of ours who a market leader, very traditional in the delivery of a particular commodity device. We were working with their innovation team. They came to us because they realized that they needed a digital solution to a particular problem that they had, and that digital expertise wasn't their thing. So I think that step one is recognizing when it's good to get external help. It's good to engage somebody from the outside. Ultimately, you may decide to add that competency to your company and staff up. But when you're going through that initial investigations, working out whether it makes sense, where the value lies, you're going to do that much quicker and cheaper to get somebody externally. The second thing is that we, in their particular case, it became clear quite quickly that for us to go and test things, put things in the marketplace, get user feedback, we needed to do that in a very rapid, iterative, incremental fashion. And at the risk of sounding too negative, that wasn't something that their existing IT team had the processes to support. And Chris talked at length there about moving to the cloud and the virtual machines within the cloud, and that can really help here. That often, if you want to put a pilot together, if you want to test that in the marketplace Sometimes it's a lot more effective to do that using publicly available resources rather than trying to change the whole organization and get the whole IT team on board. We've been working with that customer now for 4 or 5 years. We now do have the IT systems, the IT department support, and we are integrating what we've done in with their systems. They now, because we have customers that see value in the system, it now does have significant importance, and they see the value of working with that, but it wouldn't have worked if we'd have tried to align them at the start. I realise that's just 2 particular aspects, but hopefully that gives you one kind of view on the challenges.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Mike, and I just add a little bit of flavour as well from my experience. As a company or as a division that had spent 20 years making hardware, the whole company, including engineering teams and sales teams, had been optimized to continue to do that. And so when you have the idea of creating an attached startup or a spin out, or sometimes called a spin in, that Mike, you talked about with that those impossibly good-looking people who don't look like any of the engineers I have, sitting in that loft area. I think it's important. I think it's important to separate some people out, to let them free think, and to come up with new ideas. And it does cost more, and I think you have to explain that to your bosses. If you want to try and do this, you are going to have to invest some money. You can't take away from your existing engineering teams because typically they are already very highly optimized to deliver what you're currently delivering. So taking away from that impacts your existing business. So you do need to put away some money on the side to go do that. You do need to separate them because you don't want to stifle them with existing processes. But you do want to keep them linked, and I think that was another very important point that Mike made, because your company is an established player, which means you have customers, you have experience, you probably have a large distribution network, you have a lot of salespeople, a lot of marketing, maybe some brand recognition, and all of that stuff's very valuable to your startup. Your startup needs to, once it has a product and it has a service or it has something of value, wants to leverage that stuff and use it to bring those new innovations to market. And that's something that external startups can't do. They may have great new young people that are highly energized to develop new things, but they don't have a sales team, they don't have a distribution channel, they don't have a brand name, and that's a significant advantage that incumbents should leverage after spinning out a team to go innovate.
Perfect. Actually, the next question kind of transitions into that and maybe repeats a bit, but in general, Mike, you had referenced a lot of organizations being siloed. And are there any recommendations or experiences you can bring that give sort of how do you begin, I guess, shifting from being siloed to working holistically, since most companies aren't organized that way? And Chris mentioned that you're usually optimized to work in a certain way. How does one even begin the process of that shift?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I have to start by saying that I'm a software engineer rather than a change consultant. So I might be talking about this more from a technical angle. But in my experience, that can be a huge challenge. Per the previous question, it does need to come from the top. There has to be an executive edict. But like all things, we prefer to start things small. And in both with when we're working with customers in Zorka and my experience of working in large American corporations previously, the best way to start was by putting cross-discipline teams together that spanned different divisions of the company, to give them a specific project objective and work on those. People could, at the end of the day, return back to their particular domains and areas There's still very much value in all the marketing people being together, all the customer service people being together, but by running projects across multiple domains, by having, for instance, program and project managers who span multiple domains, pulling people into those initiatives. From what I've seen, that's a good way to get going on this.
I couldn't agree more. That's exactly my experience. It's sometimes when you put smart engineers in a room to go do something new, they get frustrated by all the process and the fact that you have to go talk to A to get something done and B to get something else done, precisely because of the specialization and silo organization that exists, that's existed for a long time, and it's a very well-oiled thing for doing what the company traditionally does. And having people like great project managers and product managers associated with these startups who can go and navigate all these things for you, and get those things to come together successfully. I think the worst thing in the world would be having a startup group so focused on the engineering and completely forget about the value of all the other pieces of the company as being crucial to the success. You're not going to get 95% of the company to change for your little 5% startup. It's not going to happen. So finding people who can support that and know how to navigate that organizational piece to bring those things together is just as important as having great engineering talent.
Yes, totally agree. I think the next question is aimed at Chris, but I think Mike will probably be able to chime in as well. It's a two-part question. One was how you factored in customer experience when shifting from an appliance-based delivery to a cloud-based delivery model or cloud-based solutions. You had a chart, I think, that showed that kind of progression. And how did you also reconcile the impact on your revenues when moving from a charge per box to more of a recurring revenue stream? Was that an impediment or a benefit?
So let me take those in the opposite order. From Gemalto's point of view, the financial reporting part is not too hard because we are a part of a much larger organization, and so when it comes to reporting to the street and that kind of stuff, the incremental changes we're making in one part of one division of one business unit did not affect the multi-billion-dollar revenues of the company. So from that perspective, there wasn't much impact on reporting to the street and how that affects all the way up to the top. I know, though, that at the operational level, at the annual budgeting level, at those kinds of things, having to deal with recognizing recurring revenue, laws around changes in Sarbanes-Oxley and stuff like that, there were a few years ago, how you can recognize that revenue, were initially very hard for finance people to grasp, and very hard for us to then budget. And hard for us to then think about in future years how profitability is counted and whether you can then invest more or less in different areas. But over time, it did take, just like all these other parts of the business, it took time, it takes time for us to adjust. We now have in our specific part of the business, I would say almost about a third of our revenues coming from recurring businesses, recurring streams, and so I feel now that we have adjusted to that change in the business model. The first question was, remind me, Jam?
It was around factoring in the customer experience. What role did that play when you shifted from kind of delivering a prepackaged box to a cloud solution? We obviously have a lot more flexibility in what you can deliver. Yep.
Yeah, so if I'll take customer experience from the consumer's consumption experience, a lot of things changed. Primarily, people would interface with our products through a graphical user console, which was the primary mode of interaction, and that was at the left-hand side of that chart, very much associated with the physical appliance. To now, we still have a graphical console that is still an important part, I would say, of the sales process, but now it's all APIs. It's all command lines and scripting and APIs and programmable interfaces and things being buried much deeper in the integration. So as we deliver containerized microservices, as we deliver cloud services, people integrate that into their applications via APIs, via scripts and shell scripts and all these sorts of things. And so for us, that change actually was relatively easy. It's easier for us to deliver those kinds of interfaces than it is to deliver graphical user interfaces. Not that that's necessarily particularly hard, but certainly those APIs and command line things is what people prefer now, and where we're shifting our focus.
Mike, anything to add on customer experience? Yeah, I think that's probably well within your area of expertise.
Yeah, I think hopefully short addition on each. On the customer experience, the one thing I would point out and reiterating from my talk is that for your new offering, and to paraphrase Chris with his explosion of use cases, that's potentially an explosion of users as well. So it might be that your new offering, it's a whole new set of users that you don't have relationships with, and you need to go out there, push out into the marketplace, maybe get some help of people who've got user bases, maybe reach out to try and find some test users, but you need to go out to them, you need to get them to test it, you need to get their feedback. You don't want something that is your view of what you think people need. People are very inclined to build solutions to problems that they have, or worse, there's a joke that often a solution is a hippo solution. It's the solution that is that preferred by the highest paid person in the room. Avoid all of those by actually going out to your users. By all means, go out to your existing users if you think that it's of interest to them, but look beyond those as well. And on the revenue question, for us, really the key thing is that if you can come up with a new offering that is going to disrupt your existing revenue streams, you've got no choice but to investigate and go down that path. Because if you don't, sooner or later, somebody else is going to have the same idea and they're going to do it for you. And that would be the worst.
So last question, thanks both for the answers on that. I think this might be a question for us. I don't know if this is relevant to you guys. It's a question saying, we're starting to deal with industrial IoT on the hardware of our machinery. Does your offering support edge servers and the data acquired from those type of sensors and big data from being trapped from our machines? I'll give you guys, if there is an answer you guys have on this, but from a software monetization standpoint, I'll just add that when you start to look into capturing data and enabling smart sensors, it typically is because you're looking at adding more value than just a sort of dumb piece of hardware, so to speak, which is usually wrapped around a change in business model. And typically the area that we're playing in is allowing you to better control and monetize either the software or the data, and then tie it back into the business models that you're enabling. Chris alluded to that when he gave his quote unquote shameless plug around the explosion of entitlements. Shifts in these kind of creative business models usually mean that knowing what your customer has and who has it and how you're managing it becomes more complex as you move to a software and data-centric solution. That's where the ability to manage your entitlements effectively becomes more relevant. I don't know if either of you guys have something more to add to that.
Nope.
Well, that also wraps up the questions, and exactly at the top of the hour, so you couldn't plan it any better, I guess. And apologies to the audience for a couple of the audio glitches, but I guess that lets you know that this is indeed a live webinar. I want to thank Mike and Chris for both the presentations and the terrific responses to the questions. Certainly, you guys brought the expert into the Ask the Experts today.
Thanks very much.
Thank you both. Thanks everyone for attending, and we'll see everyone at the next Ask the Experts.